Good afternoon, everyone. I'm presenting on behalf of Medicine 3. The topic for my presentation is Can't Eat Enough to Live, and my consultant is Dr. Audrin. Presenting Mrs. M, she's a 65-year-old woman who was brought by her daughter with the following complaints: breathlessness on exertion for 1 week, poor oral intake for 1 week, tiredness for 3 months, difficulty in swallowing for more than 5 years, and loss of weight for more than 5 years. History of presenting complaints. For more than 5 years, she's been having difficulty in eating. She complains of discomfort while swallowing solid food. There's no history of drooling, regurgitation, or aspiration. There's no history of vomiting. There's no loss of appetite, but there is loss of weight. For the past 1 week, her symptoms were so severe that she was not eating at all and was consuming only sips of fluid. For the past 3 months, she complained of tiredness and fatigue. She became bedbound and would only get up to use the bathroom. She complained of giddiness when getting up and had a fall recently prior to admission. There was no paucity of movements in her limbs or any diurnal variation of weakness noticed. She also had breathlessness on exertion for the past 1 week. However, there was no orthopnea or paroxysmal nocturnal dyspnea. There was dry cough present. There was no history of fever, night sweats, abdominal pain, or melena. On examination, when she presented, she was drowsy. Her GCS was E2, V2, M5. She looked very emaciated. Her vitals, her pulse was 118 beats per minute. Her respiratory rate was 26 per minute. Her blood pressure was on the lower side, 90/60. She was afebrile and was maintaining 98% on room air. Her JVP was elevated and she had bilateral pitting pedal edema. She had significant pallor. There was chylomicria and platinichia. There was no cyanosis or clubbing. She had small left axillary lymph nodes, but there were no supraclavicular lymph nodes palpable. On systolic examination, there was a pansystolic flow murmur heard in the pulmonary area. And in respiratory system examination, there were bilateral basal crepitations. For abdomen, the liver was palpable 3 centimeters below the right costal margin. There were no other masses palpable. PR-PV examination was normal. So the differentials we considered in a 65-year-old woman who's presented with dysphagia and loss of weight with anemia with failure symptoms. We considered esophageal carcinoma, CA stomach, Plummer-Vinson syndrome, achalasia, peptic strictures, or peptic ulcer disease. On investigating, she was found to have a microcytic hyperchromic anemia. She had life-threatening anemia with a HbO 1.4 grams per deciliter. She also presented with a high anion gap metabolic acidosis, the cause being severe lactic acidosis. The lactate level was 17.2. On further evaluation of the anemia, we found out that her iron was only 7, her TIBC was 456, and her transferrin saturation was 1.4%. The stool local blood was negative. However, the stool routine parasite showed hookworm ova. One interesting thing is severe anemia can actually cause lactic acidosis. Basically, glucose gets converted to ATP by entering the mitochondria and undergoes oxidative phosphorylation. Sometimes when the oxygen is supplied to the cell is very much impaired, the glucose is not able to enter this pathway and gets shunted to form lactates. There are a lot of case reports being published where lactic acidosis was associated with iron deficiency anemia. A hemoglobin value less than 3.5 grams per deciliter will result in lactic acidosis. Coming back to a patient, we went ahead with a gastroscopy to look for any occult sources of bleeding. The scopist felt that there was a doubtful upper esophageal web, so they used a pediatric scope. And while using a pediatric scope, they found no web. But they found that in the gastric antrum, there was 5 millimeter to 3 millimeter ulcer with surrounding edema and erythematous mucosa. The biopsy of that area showed a mild chronic gastritis. We tried a colonoscopy, but the bowel preparation was not adequate. So we planned to do it on an OPD basis. For the dysphagia, we went ahead with an X-ray barium swallow. And this is the finding we see. There was a shelf-like projection protruding into the esophagus, and there was proximal dilatation of the esophagus. This was suggestive of an esophageal web. Putting all the findings together, we came up with Plummer-Vinson syndrome. So Plummer-Vinson syndrome was originally described by 2 physicians from the Mayo Clinic in America almost 100 years back. It's a very rare condition characterized by classic triad of dysphagia, iron deficiency, anemia, and esophageal web. It is more common in middle-aged women, and they're at an increased risk of developing squamous cell carcinoma of the pharynx and proximal esophagus. The prevalence of post-cricoid webs is around 0.3 to 1.1% among women overall, and in patients with dysphagia, it's around 8.4 to 22.4%. This is a single population-based study done in south of Wales. Palmer-Vincent syndrome used to be very common in the first part of the last century, but because the general nutrition has improved, the incidence has drastically come down. The etiopathogenesis is mostly attributed to iron and nutritional deficiencies. So how does iron cause esophageal webs? So reduction in the activity of iron-dependent oxidative enzymes in the epithelial cell causes gradual degradation of the pharyngeal muscles and atrophy of the mucosa overlying them. This results in the development of webs. And because there's a high turnover of the GI epithelial lining, this gets aggravated. Other causes are genetic predisposition, and they have also found that autoimmune factors like pernicious anemia, thyroiditis, rheumatoid arthritis, and Crohn's disease are also associated with Plummer-Vincent syndrome. So usually the patients present with dysphagia, which is very gradual, which is painless and intermittent, noticed initially for solid foods and then for liquids. The dysphagia becomes very prominent when the diameter at the region of the web becomes less than 12 millimeter. So 80% of the patients who have dysphagia usually have mild dysphagia, that is grade 1 or grade 2. That is occasional dysphagia on taking solid foods, or they're able to swallow semi-solid diet. And they have features of anemia. They have easy fatigability, exertional dyspnea, weakness, and palpitations. They also have deficiencies of other vitamins like glossitis, angular cheilitis, premature loss of teeth, and koilonychia. The treatment of choice is barium swallow radiography, which is more sensitive than gastroscopy. So the treatment, there are case reports which show that just iron supplementation alone can improve dysphagia in mild cases. But when the webs are very fibrotic and in advanced cases, we'll have to go for an endoscopic balloon dilatation. The prognosis is 10% of patients can develop malignant transformation during follow-up. So it's very important to counsel patients that they have a higher risk of malignancy and to keep them on regular follow-up. Just like to go through the approach to dysphagia. This is taken from up to date. So this is the oral cavity. This is the upper esophageal sphincter. The upper 1/3 of the esophagus is made of striated muscle, and the lower 2/3 is made up of smooth muscles. So when a patient comes with dysphagia, it's very important to take a history. So when patients complain of nasal regurgitation, aspiration, there are other ENT symptoms, we have to consider oropharyngeal dysphagia. On the other hand, when patients complain of dysphagia localized to the chest or neck, then we have to consider esophageal dysphagia. Under oropharyngeal dysphagia, there are two types. There are either structural problems or propulsive problems. Structural is commonly Zenker's diverticulum, any neoplasm in the upper tract. Propulsive, it can be either due to neurogenic or myogenic when there's problem with peristalsis. Examples of neurogenic is Parkinson's, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, cerebrovascular accident. Examples of myogenic is myasthenia gravis. When patients complain of esophageal dysphagia, we have to get a history of whether it's only for solids and liquids or whether it's only for solids. If it's for solids and liquids, it's mostly a propulsive type. Most common is GERD and achalasia. When patients complain of dysphagia only to solids, it's because of some structural cause. If it's intermittent, think of esophageal webs. But if it's progressive, we have to always keep neoplasm in the back of our minds. So how did we manage Mrs. M? We gave 3 packed cell transfusion, following which the lactates came down to 1.7 and the hemoglobin improved to 7.6. We started on proton pump inhibitor, started on Levogen supplementation, started on multivitamins and folic acid. Because she had hookworm infestation which caused the anemia in the first place, we gave her albendazole 400 mg thrice daily. From a trial in China, we found out that 400 mg thrice daily dosing is superior to a single dose regimen. And we also advised her regarding sanitation and footwear use. We plan to follow her up. We send her to gastro OPD to do a colonoscopy. And if there is if there's no improvement in the symptoms, she might require a dilatation of her web. So the learning points in this case is when patients present with severe anemia with dysphagia, we should consider Plummer-Vincent syndrome, although the incidence is very rare nowadays. Second thing, severe anemia can lead to lactic acidosis. Thank you.
Thank you, Reva, for highlighting a severe problem due to a very common disease. Anemia is quite common in India, so now you've taught us to look for lactic acids in that. Audryn, are you there? Do you want to make any additional comments to this case?
Just a few things. One, for mild Plummer-Wilson, just supplementation of the iron supplementation itself manages to take care of the esophageal webs. in fact, the whole reason why the esophageal webs happen is the same pathology why the angular cheilitis happens, where the iron-dependent enzymes are affected. Only if the dysphagia is quite significant, then you need to proceed for esophageal web dilatation. I think our patient, we are planning for a esophageal web dilatation on OPD basis. The patient wanted to go home and come back for it. In patients with Plummer-Vinson, regular screening for GI malignancies is important. They have a high risk of developing esophageal and gastric malignancies. So they need to be kept on follow-up for malignancies.
Okay. I just have a question to both of you, because after the gastroscopy had shown there was no web, after a pediatric scopy, you still decided to go ahead with a barium swallow, which clinched the diagnosis for you. So what made you take that decision? What was a thing which told you that there's a high clinical index of suspicion of web in this person?
The patient, she kept stressing that she had severe difficulty while swallowing.
Okay.
She used to feel like there was a block in her throat. Plus, we also found that gastroscopy is not sensitive. Barium swallow is more diagnostic.
Okay. And one more question. The albendazole is 3 times on a single day or on 3 consecutive days OD?
3 consecutive days OD.
Okay, so that's also an important point you have highlighted here. Thank you for that. And I also would like to add that the disease has different names across the Atlantic. So the Plummer-Wilson is a US name, while it's called Patterson-Brown-Kelly in UK. Thank you, Reba and Audrey. We'll move on to the next case. It's from